not black, I'm Ethiopian. I'm not black, I'm Dominican. I'm not black, I'm Somali. You've probably heard this statement before, and if you've ever wondered where this attitude comes from, then this episode is for you. My name is Wayne. If you're new to this channel, welcome. On this channel, Plan Back to Africa, I share my journey of moving back to the motherland, leaving behind Germany with my 2 children to start a new life here in Nairobi, Kenya. And I also love to share my knowledge and my experience about the socio-political realities on the ground. And I've studied cultural anthropology and African studies, and my focus was on identity, how identities are being constructed. And so since it's Black History Month, I want to use this as an opportunity to break down for you how identities, in today's case, the Black identity, is being constructed, to help you understand why there are some people who don't want to identify as Black while others do. So without any delay, let's dive straight into today's topic. Now, before we talk about the identity of Blackness, we need to understand where this label Black and in extension white actually comes from. You see, when Africans were dragged on the slave ships and were kidnapped to be shipped to the Americas to work on the plantations, they didn't board the slave ships as Black people. They did so as Yoruba, as Igbo, as Mandinke. They had their ethnic identity. It was when they arrived in the Americas, the moment that they set foot on American soil, that they became the Black people. It was a label that was imposed upon them by the white man. And the same is true in reverse. When the white people boarded the ships, the slave ships, to depart for the voyage towards the African continent, to enslave Africans, right? They didn't board the slave ships as white people. That concept of Black and white didn't exist before the transatlantic slave trade. At least when it comes to the identity of Black people, not in West African societies. That was a totally different story in Kemet, right? In ancient Egypt, where indeed people identified as Blacks. But we are talking now about the transatlantic slave trade and its legacy on the Black identity and how it has shaped the Black identity. And so since most of Africans who were captured and shipped to the Americas were from West Africa, the case was that people were identifying with their ethnic society. And so, same as I said with the white people, when they boarded the slave ships, right, the crew, the ship crew, they did so as Genoese, Portuguese, Spanish, Irish, even Arabs were part of the crew. They became the white people the moment they set foot on African soil. And so this is important to understand the origin of the labels Black and white in the context that we are speaking about today, right? In the context of the Black identity. Having said that, I want to share with you how identities, such as the Black identities, are being constructed. And understanding the role of collective memory is the key here. When we talk about collective memory, we are talking about the narratives that groups remember, right? They're mostly like reinforcing a positive self-image, the narratives, and creating a sense of belonging, a sense of togetherness, a sense of place where this group belongs to. But collective memory is not just about what groups remember, but also about what groups like to forget, like certain shameful aspects of their past, right? Things that they maybe feel ashamed of. And I'm sure every society has dark chapters in their past. So that is important to understand, that collective memory is not just about remembering, but it's also about forgetting. Having said that, we have to understand the role of emotions. You know, in the past, researchers who focused on the construction of identities, they didn't have in mind the the essential role that emotions play when it comes to collective memories. And it's so important to keep this in mind. I mean, just ask yourself, why is it that what groups tend to remember is mostly things that make us feel better about ourselves, that reinforces a positive self-image, right? And this is because we tend to remember things that make us proud about ourselves. So pride is a very powerful gatekeeper here. And philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche has summed it up perfectly, even though he was talking about individual memory, but you can extend this to collective memory as well. He wrote, "I have done it, says my memory. I couldn't have done it, says my pride and stays adamant. And finally, memory gives in." And so this perfectly sums up how groups, societies deal with certain aspects and things that happened in their past that evoke a feeling of shame, right? So they tend to forget them, or let's say sometimes downplay them, ignore them, because I'm sure they cannot forget them. They are in the consciousness, however suppressed, while the aspects of their past that make them feel proud, like most foundational stories and myths of a nation, are heroic, are stories that make the people feel proud about themselves, that remember, they are meant to remember the people of that nation and society, why, not just why the group exists, but why it's worth to die and fight for this nation. And so, yes, pride and shame, two very, very important emotions that we need to keep in mind. Now, the next important thing, and this is very crucial, so you need to listen up closely, because this will help you understand how group identities such as the Black identity are being constructed, right? You know, before, researchers that dealt with identity and collective memory, they took the existence of solid social entities as the producers of collective memory for granted. So basically, they viewed collective memory as a possession, as an object, as something that a society, a group, a nation possesses, right? However, new research has shown that social entities and groups and ethnic societies even, right? Most people have a very essentialist idea of ethnic groups. But research has shown that these groups come into existence through the articulation of shared memories, of shared collective memories. So most time it's memories, collective memories of a traumatic past. In the case of the Black people, that is, of course, the transatlantic slave trade, that is chattel slavery and plantation slavery, right? And the oppression that Black people faced in the Americas and still continue to face today. So it's this shared memory, shared experience that people share with each other, and the articulation of these traumatic experiences that created a sense of belonging together to each other, a feeling of solidarity, a feeling of belonging to the same group. And this is how this new identity, the Black identity, was being shaped and constructed. So, and this goes, by the way, for so many different identities as well, even ethnic identities. As I said, so many people unfortunately have a very essentialist notion of identity, as if it's something that is static and that it can never be changed. But of course it can change. Identities, because they are shaped by collective memories, are fluid and constantly changing. We can see it everywhere. Right now I'm witnessing a shift in the United States where African Americans reject the label African and identify as what they call foundational Black Americans, right? That is also like a result of narratives that unfortunately I feel are very divisive and causing a rift among people of African descent. Of course, I agree with the demand of foundational Black Americans to be compensated by the US American state. However, I don't agree with the narratives, the underlying narratives that are feeding into this new identity because, first of all, it's not true, right? The sooner you acknowledge that your ancestors came from Africa, the sooner you stop the self-hate, the better for all of us. We can come together as one. However, maybe that's a topic for another episode. What I'm trying to say is that identities are not static. They are fluid and constantly shifting. And so to understand why they shift, we need to look at the underlying narratives that feed into these identity constructions, right? And same into the Black identity. Now, what I also find very interesting and important to understand about the construction of identity is I have made clear that groups come into existence through the articulation of shared collective memories, and not that there is the group and it has the collective memory. Now, that is again where pride and shame comes into play. Now, groups come into existence through the articulation of shared memories, and they tend to remember the things that make them proud, right? And so the identity, in a sense, shapes the memory. And the memory, again, fortifies the identity. So this relationship between identity and collective memory is circular, right? So groups tend to remember what makes them proud, and the memory, the collective memory, reinforces a sense of belonging and togetherness. And so that is why many people are sometimes stuck in a bubble, and that is why sometimes we can view identities as a prison. At least that was my experience, because you are, in a sense, in this identity group, and whenever you might think out of the box or have different memories, you are maybe considered as a traitor, right? If you bring up controversial topics, topics like dark and shameful aspects of your history that your group doesn't want to deal with, right? That your group actually wants to forget, then you're labeled as a traitor. I experience this all the time when I speak from my Ethiopian point of view about shameful aspects of the Ethiopian past, that Ethiopian people label me as a tribalist, as someone who has a hidden agenda. However, that is not the case. In fact, what I'm trying to do is create a better society, not just in Ethiopia, but all over the world, with a particular focus on the African continent, trying to build unity through understanding, mutual understanding, and also mainly because that is where I see the biggest lack, through acknowledging our shortcomings, right? Because if there's one thing that the Germans taught me is that also embracing the shameful aspects of your past is not something that we should be scared about. For me, the way I see it, it's like a sign of strength. You know, it's very powerful to be able to acknowledge your own shortcomings, your failures, and your mistakes. And that is what pushes me forward, what motivates me to speak about these controversial topics, because I remember how they make me feel. when I first dealt with them, they made me feel uncomfortable. They forced me to step out of my comfort zone, to question my own beliefs and understandings about my culture, my nation, my own upbringing, right? And it, most importantly, and that is what I'm so proud of, is that acknowledging the shortcomings of not just my nation, but also of my ethnic society, and also about, yeah, you can even say, we have multiple layers of identity, right? The Black identity is just one layer. And that is also something that many people fail to understand. You can be so many things at the same time. I can be Black, I can be Ethiopian, I can be Tigrawati, which is my ethnic identity. And yeah, all at the same time. The one thing doesn't exclude the other. And so this is what I'm very, very happy about, to have understood how identities are being constructed. And that I see embracing the shameful aspects of our past as that this is a sign of strength, because this has helped me to feel empathy for other groups, whether it is other ethnic societies in Ethiopia, for people who think differently, who identify differently. It has helped me to be a person that stands in solidarity with other people who are oppressed. And so, yeah, this is very important, I believe, to understand, so that we can overcome the division, right? To understand the underlying narratives first that are causing this division. Now, back to the topic of Blackness as an identity. Now, if we want to understand why there are some people, whether it is in Ethiopia, whether it's in Somalia, whether it's in Sudan, in Haiti, in you name it, why they don't want to identify as Black, we need to look at the underlying narratives that they are being fed, that they were taught about Blackness, to understand why they reject that, to understand, we have to understand what are the narratives, what are, like, let's say, for instance, people who say, I'm not Black, I'm Ethiopian, right? What does it mean for them to be Ethiopian? What does it mean for them to be Black? How is Blackness or Ethiopianness being constructed? What are the underlying narratives that define Blackness and Ethiopianness and their society, right? Because they are never universal. Now, if you want to understand how what are the underlying narratives that define Ethiopianness, you should check out my last YouTube episode where I speak about how UNESCO and together with the imperial Ethiopian ruling elite have created the national Ethiopian identity and the underlying narratives that feed into this identity, and that will help you understand why some, and mind you, this is just like I'm talking about a group of Ethiopians. We should never generalize, never. So there is a part of Ethiopians that were fed wrong narratives about themselves with the help of UNESCO, the narratives that alienated Ethiopia from the rest of Africa, that reinforced a false sense of superiority among certain groups within Ethiopia. And so this is important to understand why these people would not identify as Black. What is also important to understand is that the concept of Blackness, the way that we know it from America, sometimes cannot be translated to the context of certain African countries and societies. When I am in Europe or in America, of course, I am considered as Black. And this is now very, very important to understand. Maybe I start with that. I've talked about the origin of the terms Black and white. Now, let's talk about the meaning of these labels today. Now, I actually thought it's obvious, but unfortunately it seems that it's not for some people. the terms black and white do not refer exclusively to skin color. Because after all, I mean, none of us is really black and white. We are all shades in between, right? I've never seen a person that is really black. So, and I've also never seen a person that is like completely white. So what I'm trying to say is that the terms, the labels black and white are not biological terms, but these are political terms. And that is what many people fail to understand on both sides. Those that identify as black and who criticize others for rejecting this label, and also those who reject this label and who point fingers on those who have embraced this label. So we need to understand the label black as a political term. What do we mean by that? The way I understand it, and the way it's also like the definition actually, is that black people are a political group, a group of people that can potentially, not necessarily, become victims of racism, while white people, on the other hand, whether they like it or not, enjoy certain privileges, so-called white privileges, right? We live in a world where white supremacy is a very powerful force to reckon with, unfortunately, a force that we are trying to dismantle, and unfortunately also a force that works in the absence of white people. Like I always say, white supremacy continues to work powerfully even in the absence of white people. Colorism is a perfect example, right? So yeah, and what I'm trying to say is that when we look at the labels black and white, let's forget the label white, let's focus on the label black, right? Because white people don't identify themselves as white people. It's only black people that do, to show solidarity, to show unity, to show a shared common heritage, and also struggle and vision for the future. Now, the way I see it is that embracing the black identity is also a way of aligning with the struggle of black African people, the struggle for liberation. However, what I also have a problem with is when certain black people in the United States or in Europe try to impose their labels upon African people and fail to understand that the social stratification, right, on the African continent is completely different, and that these labels are very difficult to be translated onto the African context. For instance, me, as I said, when I'm in Europe, when I'm in America, I'm considered as black. But when I'm in Ethiopia, I'm not considered as black, but we have different categories. People would call me ቀይሕ, which means red. And of course, we have dark-skinned Ethiopians who are considered as blacks. And also there, if you have watched my previous episodes on anti-blackness and colorism in Ethiopia, you can see that also societies on the African continent are divided, right? That these different categories that we also have in South Africa, right? We have the labels colored and blacks, that they were introduced onto the people, onto the societies to divide the people. There were certain groups who saw themselves as superior, and unfortunately, these division is continuing to this day. And while I agree that it's important to overcome the divisions, I think by trying to impose your views, Western views about blackness upon the people of Africa is not the right approach. Instead, I suggest that we come together, that we examine the narratives together that cause the division, and look at things that we have in common, that we share. You know, I think it was in the 50s or 60s, there was this Black consciousness movement, and there was a group of Francophone intellectuals and literaries who started the tigritude movement. So part of this group was poet and politician and activist Aimé Césaire from Martinique, and then there was Léopold Senghor from Senegal, which was the first president of independent Senegal, and I think the third person was Damas from a South American country. I'm not sure, I don't remember. However, these were the Francophone group who reclaimed their Black identity, their African identity after decades of, after like centuries of brainwashing through their French colonizers, who stripped them of their African, their Black identity. And so, yeah, there was this movement to embrace your African roots, your identity, your Black identity. And then there was the similar movement in the English-speaking colonies, former colonies, and the United States, like the Afrocentric movement, but also on the African continent. Anyway, I feel that the quote of Wole Soyinka, which is one of my favorite quotes of all time, and I have to share it with you, might be the solution to our division. So what he did basically was he responded to the Black poets and literaries from the Negritude movement with the words, I mean, these words are so powerful, and I want you to share your thoughts about this in the comment section below. So what he basically said was, a tiger does not proclaim its tigritude, he pounces. What he means by that is that in the context of expression of Black identity, he criticized that there was too much focus on identity. And basically he was saying that, like, a tiger, when he goes into the jungle, he doesn't shout around and says, I'm a tiger, I'm a tiger, I'm a tiger, be afraid, be scared, you better back up. He pounces, you know. What he's saying is that actions speak louder than words. And I totally agree with him. That is also my own personal position towards this topic. When people ask me, do you Ethiopians see yourself superior over others? Do you consider yourself as Black? I love to respond with the words, a tiger does not proclaim its tigritude. He pounces, right? So I let my actions speak louder than words. People out there shouting the whole day, I'm Black, I'm proud, but their actions, they are not bringing any benefit to the Black community, to their community. And I see, unfortunately, a similar trend. Sorry, but I'm going to be honest with you, with the FBAs, the Foundational Black Americans. There's too much noise, too much focus on the Black identity, but I don't really see how this will bring them forward. From what I've seen now is that they are alienating themselves more and more from other Black people, African people, who are willing to support their cause, right, when it comes to reparations. However, I feel that there's so much focus on identity. And this is the same for Ethiopians who say, I'm not Black, I'm Ethiopian. You know, that's like, how does this benefit the Ethiopian people, right? Let's focus on building. Let's focus on supporting our own businesses, locally owned businesses, Black businesses, name it as you want. As I said, let my actions speak louder than my words. I don't run around and say I'm Black, I'm this, I'm that. Like, this channel is called Plan Back to Africa, and I have one goal and one goal only, and that is to inspire the diaspora to reconnect with their roots, to invest in the African continent, to come and see for themselves the beauty and the opportunities that this continent has to offer, and so that they can feel a sense of like belonging again to the soil, to the people, to be embraced by the people. And yeah, hopefully that we come together here on the African continent and, as I said, start building, support each other's businesses, celebrate our milestones together, right? We live in crazy times. I mean, look at what is going on in Europe, in America. We have lunatics, white supremacists ruling the world, right? And what are we doing? How are we liberating ourselves when we continue focusing so much on our identities? And identities, as I said, the narratives, the underlying narratives that are dividing us further rather than uniting us. That's it for today. It's a heavy topic. It's very complex. It's very controversial. Let me know what you think in the comments. What do you think about and how do you feel about this statement by Wole Soyinka? A tiger doesn't proclaim its tigritude, he pounces. And how can we as a people take action, right, that helps us liberate our people, our continent? I hope you enjoyed this episode and I look forward to see you next time. Bye.